Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Sunday, February 11th, and today is day 128 since October 7th. Since today is Sunday, I thought for those of us who self-identify as Christian or followers of Jesus, it's a day of worship, a day of Sabbath, perhaps, hopefully a bit of rest, nourishment, focusing on God, catching our breath. And I thought I would share a short reflection, a devotion of sorts, that I hope might encourage us and maybe just encourage your heart. Perhaps a reminder that God is present, that God is with us. The name Emmanuel means God is with us, the one who came into the world. And we are assured throughout the scriptures that God hears our cries and that God is one who hears the cries of the oppressed, the cries about the horrors of the current situation, the cries that the atrocities of all that is happening now in Gaza, the cries of the families of those who continue to be held hostage, that they might be released, that God hears the cries of his people and that God has not abandoned us, even though we don't yet see a response. That hope means believing in that which we do not yet see, but that God has not abandoned the people of Gaza. And we don't know the time or the place or the details of when peace will be revealed, but we know that God is good, and we know that God is present, and we know that God hears the cries of the oppressed. So I wanted to tell a little bit of a story. I had a coffee meeting this week with someone related to everything that's happening in Israel and in Gaza. And, it was a professional meeting. It was not a personal meeting. It was actually not a religious meeting. And yet someone told me this story that was deeply personal about someone in their life who was going through a time of deeply questioning the presence of God. And it's not my story to tell, but one of the key themes I wanted to talk about was that this person was afraid. And the person was questioning, where is God? And they had this fear in their heart. And in the circumstances that were present, there was a Jesuit priest who was invited into the situation and came and met with this person. And this Catholic priest, I'm sorry, he was Franciscan, not Jesuit, Franciscan priest, but this priest came and met with this individual and sought to offer some words of comfort and prayed with this individual. And in the midst of their prayer, this priest said these words: "Have courage, my friend, for God is with you." And he actually said something like, "Jesus is waiting for you." And I thought that was so profound, and I was so deeply moved by those words. Have courage, my friend. Jesus is waiting for you. And that's the word that I want us to hear today, that whatever the circumstances we're in individually or as a community, or as we seek peace and call for a ceasefire in Gaza, and as we call for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, as we seek, the release of hostages and prisoners who are held unjustly, might we have courage? Might we not give up hope, but might we have courage for whatever it is that God is calling us to do? Might we have courage and know that God is with us? There's a verse in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6, that says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you or forsake you." And I thought that was a good verse to reflect upon today. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you, nor will he forsake you. I woke up this morning to a story in my inbox, and honestly, I don't say this lightly. It is from some of the most courageous people that I know. It was an email from some Jewish Israelis who partner and accompany Palestinians that serve Bedouin communities in the South Hebron Hills. These people, they are Israeli accompaniers of Bedouins, and they are courageous. The Israeli accompaniers are courageous, and the Bedouins they meet with are courageous for totally different reasons. The areas where the Bedouins live are in the South Hebron Hills. It's south of Hebron. The city is called Khalil, the city of friendship. It's a southern city in the occupied territories. And so these communities are in the desert. And there are hilltop communities that have been settled by some of the most militant Jewish settlers and some of the most violent Israeli settlers. And so the communities where the Bedouins live and where these Israeli accompaniers meet them are some of the places where we see the most violent attacks I've told some of the stories of this over the years. There's a blog that I wrote about El Khair, one of these villages, where in 2022, Sheikh Suleiman was killed. Sheikh Suleiman was in El Khair, this village, and he was actually run over in a truck. Like a truck ran over him and he was killed by a group of militant settlers. These villages include Musafir Yatta, which we hear about a lot, Tuba, El Khair. There's many, many villages in the South Hebron Hills. And life for Bedouins who live there in South Hebron, you want to talk about a place that has no hope. There are land confiscations, demolitions, settler attacks. They don't have food. They live in abject poverty. Many of these communities don't have running water. They experience harassment on a regular basis. And since October of last year, things have only gotten worse. And I wanted to read to you a note that I got last night, and I read it in my email this morning, that exemplifies a few things that I think we should understand about courage. I won't tell you the names of these people, except to say that they have more courage than anyone I know. And my prayer for them is that God would give them strength. I've changed their names so to protect their identity. The Jewish accompaniers accompany these Palestinians at risk, literally to their own life. The voice of this letter is the voice of Jewish peace activists and accompaniers. And so they say this. So this again is the voice of Jewish peace activists, and this is the email that I received. Every hour, every day, difficulties and crimes pile up, even in the south of Mount Hebron, and there's no justice, there's no pay, and we cannot even help. And there is no mention of rescue. Since the present war broke out, our permanent aid, helping with studies and professional courses, has been augmented, and the existential needs of the population now denied the possibility of even making a living. We can bring them Pampers or milk powder for their babies, basic food for their families, medication, and the like, thanks to the donations of our dear friends. But we cannot affect the trampling, the power-mongering settlers, or the government's policy, the army, the police, the civil administration. These now multiply the basic needs, and our abilities are diminished. Sometimes I think that even Sisyphus would give up. What we do unconditionally is to maintain discourse in which our friends and we might find a source of strength. Early this week, we visited friends, and I'll use the name Mohammed to tell about who they visited. It is not the Bedouin's real name. Mohammed said that for a few days, settlers did not bring their flocks to graze on the village's farmland, the Bedouin village, but he said on Saturday, the settlers came again. And the large flock of the settlers dined on the barley that we had sown in our own fields. The barley had just begun to sprout. And I saw a familiar pain between the smarting insult and a helplessness took over the room. In the silence, I said to Mohammed, "You are brave people." And they asked me why I said this. And I answered that it was because for them to manage to control themselves and not take revenge was brave. And I Googled and I found a poem called Revenge by Taha Muhammad Ali. And I asked a young man in the room to read it aloud in Arabic for those who were present. This is the poem. At times, I wish I could meet in a duel the man who killed my father and razed our home, expelling me into a narrow country. And if he killed me, I'd rest at last. And if I were ready, I would take revenge. But if it came to light when my rival appeared, that he had a mother waiting for him, or a father who'd put his right hand over, the heart placed in his chest whenever his son was late, even by just a quarter of an hour for a meeting that they had set, then I would not kill him, even if I could. Likewise, I would not murder him if it was soon made clear that he had a brother or sisters who loved him and constantly longed to see him, or if he had a wife to greet him and children who couldn't bear his absence and whom his gifts would thrill, or if he had friends or companions, neighbors he knew, or allies from prison or a hospital room, or classmates from his school asking about him and sending him regards. But if he turned out to be on his own, cut off like a branch from a tree, without a mother or a father, with neither a brother nor sister, wifeless, without a child, and without kin or neighbor or friends, colleagues or companions, then I'd add not a thing to his pain. Within that aloneness, not the torment of death and not the sorrow of passing away. Instead, I'd be content to ignore him when I passed him by on the street, as I, convinced myself that paying him no attention in itself was a kind of revenge. That's the end of the poem. But the letter continued, and this Jewish accompanier said, after this, there were no more questions, but only heads around the room nodding and agreeing. And then I heard the story from the Bedouin community that last Saturday, on February 3rd, work began, and the paving truck paved a track through Muhammad's farmland, the same land that the settlers have prevented him from tending since the outbreak of the current war. And the settlers brought a bulldozer and they began their work. They worked at night. And as usual, there is no justice, no one to turn to. And we sat in the morning sun with Muhammad and his father next to what would have been a house had Muhammad been able to afford completing its construction, and we saw the injustice with our own eyes. So much sadness within their eyes, but there was no rage. And I asked Muhammad about this, and he said, we don't think about revenge. We just think about ways to stay on our land. We would gladly live at peace with our neighbors, but they do not want this. They do not want peace. Muhammad speaks very little, if ever, and I have never heard him utter so many words at once. But every word is golden, and when I write them, they are etched in my heart, and I send them to you with so much love. That was the end of the email that I received. And I wanted to share it with you because I think that there are lessons we can learn from both these Jewish Israeli activists and accompaniers and from these Palestinian Bedouins. There's two things, I mean, there's multiple things, but two things I think we can learn about courage. One, from these Jewish Israelis who are risking their own lives just by being present in solidarity to accompany these Bedouin communities. They literally could be beaten, threatened, arrested, killed for their own activism. What lesson do we learn from this? We learn that courage is the courage to show up, to be present. And from the Palestinian Bedouins, the natural response when you are attacked, when your home is destroyed, when your fields are given to flock that belong to other people, the natural response is to fight back violently, not nonviolently. And yet these Bedouins are responding with active nonviolent resistance. They are resisting their treatment, but without violence, without anger, without revenge. And so might we learn from them the same lessons that we learned from Jesus, the Prince of Peace, that peaceful, nonviolent resistance is one of the most courageous acts of all. So might this be an encouragement to us as we work together in our efforts towards peace.